So thank you all very much for coming. I had no idea how many people were going to turn up this afternoon. We had, I think, close to 600 people between our main room and our 2 overflow rooms at the Emergency Faculty Senate meeting last Tuesday, and I know a lot of people got there. But given the level of interest and concern, I thought it was important to offer another time and date for people to come, talk, listen, express their concerns, and give me their comments as well. I want to thank everyone for the notes, the calls. I know many of you have been involved with profs. Some of you have been involved with a variety of public statements that have come out, and I really appreciate that. A couple of things I want to note: that I am calling a meeting like this, but only with junior faculty next week, and I think that's important because they have a set of particularly unique concerns around all of this. So I'm planning to meet with them next week, and the details on that I think are just now coming out. Let me ask how many of you were at the Faculty Senate meeting last. So there's about a third here who were not, and I am going to apologize for those who were there because I do want to repeat some of the material that I talked about there, because in part I want to make sure everybody hears this as clearly as I can say it, at least. I just want to note that this is a time when we've got to all pull together on this one. We have to be clear that tenure and shared governance are absolutely integral to the University of Wisconsin and to every other world-class university. And it's not about a lifetime job. It is about freedom of inquiry, assurance that no matter what research area you are working on or what you're saying about it, you are not subject to intervention, particularly from the political process and political actors. And it is at public universities where the need for that type of prevention, I think, is most obvious. And you all know the stories from past history, and it's not just Professor Richard Ely back in 1894, which led to our sifting and winnowing statement, and when someone tried to get rid of him as a tenured faculty member, but a whole variety of examples we can cite in every decade. And it's just academic freedom is important to a strong university. It's absolutely central to the University of Wisconsin, and our history here matters a great deal. And I will say what I've said in other settings. I will not accept a tenure policy that is inconsistent with our peer universities or that violates accepted standards. And until we have such a policy in place, I will pledge no changes in existing practice until such new and effective policies are clearly established. And let me come back and talk about the process by which we're going to get from here to there. I know that there are a lot of angry people and a lot of very worried and a lot of very upset people. And as I've said in several places, my staff can tell you just how angry I've been at various times over the last 5 to 6 months through this entire process. But my role is not to be angry. My role is to figure out how we move forward and get to where we need to be. There were a lot of concerns stated very loudly and clearly at last week's faculty forum, and the Senate passed clear language urging the legislature to strike the non-fiscal language, that is anything not specifically related to the budget, and calling on President Raycross, the Board of Regents, and me to use, and I quote, all means at our disposal, unquote, to achieve that goal. And I think the Academic Staff Assembly, have they met? I was out of town for a day. I think they're meeting later this week, and I expect they're going to do something similar. I've also heard from a number of professional and scholarly organizations out of their concerns. Let me tell you what I've done since last Tuesday, because I know there's some people in the room who are concerned with that. So I and my legislative team have been in touch with a number of members of the legislature. I have either talked to, or a member of my legislative team has talked to everyone in leadership and everyone on the Joint Finance Committee. In addition, our staff has proposed alternative language for Section 39. That's the section that talks about reasons for dismissing faculty that are more in line with AAUP standards. And I know that Raycross has also held conversations and made some very similar calls. If we are not successful in getting this changed at the legislature, we are preparing a veto request, which we will be sending to the governor around this language, which is the next step. The timing of this is as follows. As many of you know, the budget is sort of stuck right now because they can't quite figure out what they're doing on the transportation budget and on the Bucks Arena. And that actually has offered us an opportunity over this last week to hold all of these conversations, because normally the budget would have moved much faster. The expectation is that later this week they will announce a final deal, and that will then have to go into drafting language. That will take about 5 to 6 days, and this will probably go to the floor for a vote with the Assembly and the Senate sometime towards the end, middle to the end of next week, if things stay on schedule, and the governor will then take a week or so looking through this carefully before he would ultimately sign it and make any decisions around vetoes. So we're talking about at least another 2-week process and potentially a little bit longer before this is actually finally done. I have certainly heard people's request to engage with our alumni and with our donors, as we did around the budget cuts earlier this spring. In addition to a story informing all of our, I think it's 260,000 plus alumni who received the Badger Voice publication last week, we are also sending a very detailed communication to our most connected alums. These are people who have volunteered to help us, particularly to be involved with political and legislative issues. This is a group known as the Alumni for Wisconsin. We aren't actually run by us. This is run separately through the Wisconsin Alumni Association, but we will be asking for their support and for their voice, and that, I think, is going out in real time if it hasn't gone out already. Again, that's not directly under my control. I spoke with about 600 of our best supporters from the city of Milwaukee last Thursday. We had a UW Foundation event in Milwaukee, and one of the things we were doing there was giving alumni awards to Senator Cole and to Commissioner Bud Selig. And Senator Cole, who spoke before me, said everything that I needed to say, and said it very effectively, and much better coming from him than from me, and talked about his concerns and the need for people to stand up. So I was pleased with that. I've also worked very hard to solicit media coverage, telling the story from the point of view of the University of Wisconsin. There's been a great deal of national media coverage. I think much of it has been at least somewhat misinformed. If I see one more headline saying tenure abolished at the University of Wisconsin, I don't know what I'll do. I'll be as unhappy as I am. Tenure is, as I'm going to say, tenure has not been abolished here. And there was an op-ed in Sunday's paper. I was on the program Up Front with Mike Couchet yesterday. I've been trying to get an opinion piece in the New York Times. They seem remarkably uninterested given how in much detail they're covering this story in other parts of the paper, but we will keep trying to push some of those national publications as well. So, this is only the latest in a whole series of things that have happened over the last 6 months. And I understand why people are extremely concerned, if not seriously angry, whether we're talking about changes to the mission statement, deep cuts in our budget, attacks on faculty about the workload and how much you need to teach. It's been a bad spring, and these changes dumped on top of this without consultation and foreknowledge adds to it. And indeed, some of the problems here are the complete lack of consultation. Anyone could have told people that the language they were adopting would have caused serious concern, but they never asked. This understandably takes a toll on morale, and I am very worried right now, particularly with the national stories going around about what's happening in this faculty, and we have got to work hard, very hard, over this next fall and winter to retain our top faculty, both younger and more senior stars, as well as we're going to have to do some good recruiting this year. And we've got to put money into some high demand funds, into retaining and into recruiting, and I understand that. However tough a budget year this may be, we can't afford not to do that in the coming year. We also need to work on presenting our story as well as possible through the coming years, not just in the next few weeks, to the state of Wisconsin, because we're going to come up to another budget in 2 years, and we can't go through this again. And we need the sort of citizen support and state support that I think we were able to generate 2 or 3 months into this budget, but that we need to potentially be able to move faster and more nimbly and generate more quickly. But having said that's some of the things that I've been working on. Let me talk about just the facts of where we are, okay? So first of all, as you all know, the statutory language around tenure is proposed to be removed from statute and turned over to the regents. Within a week after that proposal came out publicly, the regents voted unanimously to take the language in statute and adopt it as regental policy. These are the definitions and authorization about tenure at the university. I will tell you that that by itself does not concern me a great deal, because every one of our peers has that language in regental policy, not in state statute. If that was the only thing that had happened, I think there wouldn't, people would be concerned. It's a change on something they care a lot about. We can debate whether that is stronger when it's in state statute or whether it's stronger in regental policy. And I think it's not obvious which of those is the stronger. That is a valid debate to have. But it wouldn't put us at any competitive disadvantage. The more problem issue, number 2, was that they took a set of language that was in regental policy around staff layoffs and dropped it into statute as statutory policy around faculty layoffs, okay? And the language is essentially, it's just not appropriate, right? It says that faculty layoffs could be allowed for reasons such as program discontinuance, curtailment, modification, or redirection. Now, let me be clear what this language is. This is not directive language. It is not the sort of language that says, you must do this, which many state statutes are about. This is basically authorizing language, saying that the regents may take their authority to make decisions around faculty layoffs, for any of the following reasons. It does not require them to do so. And when you have authorizing language of this sort, what always happens is you write administrative policies around it, defining when you will take up that authority and how you will take up that authority. So, the next thing that is going to happen, if indeed this language does come through and we are unsuccessful in our efforts to change it, is that we will be writing the appropriate administrative language. And the university committee is in the process of appointing a small faculty committee to draft such language that is going to be quite restrictive as to when that authority would be used, and quite inclusive in terms of faculty voice in how such decisions would be made, right? So I would imagine that language would say things like, all other considerations would be taken into account, such as moving tenured faculty into other schools and colleges and departments. Tenure is generally held at the university level, so program closures would normally not be subject, if there are any other options available. I suspect it's going to have substantial faculty voice in any decision making if we are involved in such issues. And I have been looking at statutes that other schools have, that our peer schools have, and I think there's very clear language to pick up and use here. But it is language that we have to adopt. The recommendations of this committee will go to the Faculty Senate in the fall. The Faculty Senate would have to approve this language as part of their policies and procedures. And like all faculty changes in policies and procedures, this would then have to go to the Board of Regents for approval, okay? That is to your benefit, because when the Board of Regents approves it, it becomes regental policy. And they can't violate it without violating their own policy. It also means that when you have a new chancellor, he or she can't change the rules because there's regental policy about this. So I very much hope that we can move forward with that process, and I am reasonably confident, I know we're going to come back and talk about this, that the regents, if we give them language that are standard, acceptable rules and regulations consistent with our peers, are going to approve that language and allow us to adopt it into our faculty procedures. Now, we're moving forward on our own on this. The regents are almost surely going to be writing language that at least will cover the comprehensive, the four-year schools. Milwaukee's probably working on its own language as well. It is quite possible all of us are going to end up with the same language, right? And in fact, my sense is one of the reasons for us to move on this quickly is if we put language together, everyone else is going to look at it. And from my point of view, I'd be delighted if that language were adopted throughout the system. But my first concern is let's get the right language in place for the University of Wisconsin at Madison, which is a school that is different in kind than the other schools in the system. And they can do what they want to do. We first have to do the right thing here. What else do I want to say? There is also potential changes, there are changes to shared governance. We know less about these. So unlike the tenure changes where they took language from another and just dumped it in wholesale, so you've got very, very detailed language here. The shared governance, we simply have a high-level summary. It's not entirely clear what they're doing there, but I will tell you that I've already sent letters to every one of our shared governance groups, to ASEC, to CSEC, to the Faculty Senate, the University Committee, as well as to ASM, the student group, saying that expressing my belief of the importance in shared governance and my expectation that the changes, at least as I have seen them, are not likely to lead to any change in the standard practices that we all follow here with regard to shared governance and broad consultation. That is central to who we are as a university and central to what we need to do. I obviously believe that we can deal with these changes and that we can get to a point 6 months from now where the sort of tenure protections that we have are not very different from the tenure protections we had 6 months ago. But we have to get there. This isn't going to happen next week. It's a process, and it's an important process, and I need everyone to basically stay with us as we move through that process. I deeply regret the national publicity we've been receiving. I deeply regret the problems this is going to create for us. I know we're going to have a bullseye on our back with regard to other places trying to recruit away our top faculty. I know that it is going to be hard to do some recruiting in some departments this coming year. And you know, we've got to do everything we can, I particularly and the other leadership, to make that, to reduce those problems as much as possible. But I also just honestly need people, everyone, to be working with us into going through this process as best as we can. I deeply appreciate the faculty in this university. It has been a pleasure getting to know them, seeing what you all do on an educational basis as well as on a research basis. The faculty are the core asset of this university on which our reputation is based. And you know, we've had some very tangible shows of support for this university and for its faculty over this last week. Most importantly, the announcement on Thursday night in Milwaukee that 2 of our alums, Ab and Nancy Nicholas, are going to be giving us $50 million to match for scholarship funding. And you all know how much we need both undergraduate and graduate level scholarships and fellowships. And that is going to be ours to use as best we can. And I'm hoping we blow through that match as quickly as we blew through the mortgage match. And we have 167 new fully funded chairs at this university in the last 7 months. And we're going to have large numbers of new scholarships. That's the sort of good news that I hope will give faculty something of a shot in the arm, saying that our alumni support us, our donors support us, and we all need to be committed to keeping the University of Wisconsin here in Madison the strongest possible institution that it always has been and that needs to be into the future. So that's more than enough. Let me stop there, and this session is for me, the rest of it to listen to you, to hear your concerns. If you've got questions I can respond to. I've also got a number of people in the audience set up here to answer if you need someone from HR, if you need our chief lawyer, the general counsel here, if you need to know more about the state, Charlie Hoslet is in charge of all our state outreaches here, and you know, we will respond as we need to or listen and take notes as we need to. So there are microphones, there are 3 microphones at the front of the room. I'd ask you if you've got a question, a comment, an issue, come up to one of the 3 microphones. I'll take you in order. And I would ask that you let others, you know, take their turn. So if you've been up once, wait until it's sort of calmed down until you come up again. So let me open it up for whoever wants to speak first. I see Dave moving towards the microphone.
I really appreciate this opportunity.
Is the mic on?
Just speak close to it. Okay. I do really appreciate this opportunity to ask questions and to hear updates on what has happened since the Faculty Senate meeting. This is part technical question, and then it has a hypothetical at the end. We've talked a lot about Section 39. And we know that Section 12 on tenure appointments has been shifted into Regent policy. We haven't yet talked about how the shared governance pieces and the tenure pieces fit together. And so I just want to ask you, and this isn't a trick question or a pop quiz, but Sections 4.C.1 and 4.D.1 of the AAUP's RIR on academic freedom and tenure states that who should have the primary responsibility for making decisions to discontinue programs for financial exigency or educational considerations.
It says the faculty have the final decision making, and that's what I would expect our procedures would say.
And unfortunately, I think the issue is then that the omnibus motion, Section 35, what role has the faculty or committee thereof been given the responsibility for doing?
So it is our job to write procedures that decide who has authority to make what sorts of decisions.
But if the statute says that its duty is restricted to review and may not question the decision, how can we make policies that are
No,
consistent
I think
with
you're
that?
actually misreading that, because the way I read the statute, it says, it isn't talking about the decision to close a program or, when when you would take up such authority and who would do it. That's talking about once you've made a decision to close a program. If there are faculty who
Yes.
might be affected by that, you can have a whole hearing procedure about how you deal with that, but you cannot reopen the program closing decision in the hearing on how you deal with faculty.
But when
That's the way I'm reading that language.
But when Section
Because-
38 declares that the
Yeah.
faculty are subordinate to the decision and the powers vested in the Board of Regents and the Chancellor, how can that power be given to us when it's specifically subordinate in the state statute?
So this is where I really want to see the final drafting language on the shared governance statutes. Because if indeed all it is doing is taking out the phrase, which is what at least the high-level summary suggests, is involvement in immediate governance and policy decision, but keeps the rest of the language, which talks about the need for faculty to be involved with all sorts of educational-related issues, then I don't think there's any conflict.
Okay, and then this is the hypothetical that this
Yeah.
leads to.
Yeah.
If the Board of Regents or a Chancellor were to exercise its permission, and assuming that we're talking about permissive, not directive language, its permission to use statutory powers to discontinue, et cetera, a program, and I'll use the example of what just happened at the UNC Chapel Hill for a poverty research institute, which I think would probably resonate with you given your experience with IRP here. And it followed the law and the procedures which are right now in the proposed law for doing so. In what forum would the faculty affected be able to appeal that decision?
This is exactly why you want to write administrative procedures. I don't have an immediate answer to that because you need the detailed planning in hand, and it is what I think the UC-appointed committee is going to be doing, is discussing all of those contingencies.
Right.
And you rightfully are asking the right question. Those are the questions that that group is going to struggle with. And we'll see where they go and what answers they come up with.
And a question for the attorney related. If the answer is the Board of Regents who holds the ultimate power, and that is not taken up, as it would be unlikely for the Board of Regents to rule against itself, wouldn't a court of law just simply be able to say that the state is exercising its authority as permitted by the law? And would we be able to sue?
So I'm going to call our our lawyer here, the general counsel up to the Ray Tafora, some of you know. He has a great deal of experience with state statutes. He was the Deputy Attorney General in the Tommy Thompson administration and has worked in I'll let Ray answer this because he's got more authority and knowledge of it than I do. Yeah.
Thanks, Chancellor. It's always difficult to answer these types of hypotheticals without specific facts. Now, having said that, let me venture a guess on this. To the extent that the Board of Regents makes a decision on a tenure-related matter, okay, those are likely appealable to the circuit court, okay, as are all decisions of state agencies under either Chapter 227 or what would be called a writ of certiorari type action, as a very general matter.
Thank you.
Sure.
That is helpful. Appreciate
Great.
your time.
Thanks. Yes, Mark, you're up at the front here.
Hi, Mike Holmlich from Ed Policy Studies and Sociology. I'm an emeritus professor. I don't know why I'm not home right now in that case, but I have a series of questions, but in the interest of everybody getting their chance, I'm not gonna, I'll sit down and get back up if need be. Several about lobbying, where that's at. But in the same vein as Dave's question, given that some of the Republican legislators opposed the public authority because President Cross said he wasn't going to make any changes in tenure or faculty governance, given that the regents did not adopt Tony Evers' motion to ask for the rescission of this language from the omnibus bill, why ought we be confident that the regents and campus can and will preserve tenure protections as they have been, and shared governance as practiced, which has included shared authority, not merely consultation and transparency? Some would suggest that as regents serve, they come to see the institution more through the eyes of the institution. I have to wonder if it's a more reasonable conjecture that these provisions are being put there on the expectation they'll be used. And that Republican regents, especially the more recently appointed regents, including the son of the Bradley Foundation chair, president, will use them. And they'll do that regarding them as in the best interests of the state and the institution. I'm not saying they somehow are malevolent. I think they will exercise those powers in the belief they are doing the right thing. But as long as they're there, why in the world should we expect they won't be used? Thanks.
So we have had in statutory authority for as long as these, I don't know how long these statutes have been there, for decades, the authority of the regents to lay off faculty in the case of financial exigency. They have never declared a financial emergency. You know, it's been their authority, they've never taken it up, right? So I think that you can't assume that giving people this authority means they're going to run out and take it, right? You know, my best answer to you is we are going to see over the next 4 to 5 months, we are going to produce a process which writes a document that writes some procedures, that sends that to the Faculty Senate. I have said, and I mean this seriously, we will not accept a document that I don't think that none of us think is, you know, not consistent with the standard AAUP type requirements. And once that is approved by Faculty Senate, it is going to go to the Board of Regents for approval. And, you know, I can't say anything to assure you about this, but you're going to see in the next 5 to 6 months whether they're willing to approve such language or not. And if they do, it then becomes binding language on them. All right? So, you know, my best answer to you is we'll all find this out, right? And you may be less confident than I, but we're going to find this out, and in the reasonably near future. All right? I have said this in some other settings that, you know, I'm one of those who actually think regental statute might be a little bit safer than state statute right now, the regental policy. But that's partly because, you know, regents volunteer for 7-year terms of what for them, some of them is almost close to a full-time job, right? And they do that because they're alumni of these institutions. They care about them. Over those 7, you know, some of them come in not knowing much about universities. They learn a lot about them over those 7 years. And, you know, it's a term the political scientists refer to as regulatory capture. You know, it happens to the regents all the time. You know, the governors are always annoyed because their appointees, you know, go into the regents and go native with the university. And I trust that procedure right now a little more than I trust the legislative procedure. But, you know, I will say what I've said before. We are a public entity. Every public entity is subject to the laws of the state and what the state legislature does. We are also an entity with a governing board, as are both our public and our private peers. And the governing board always has final authority over the entity, whether it's public or private. And, you know, that is a fact of life for the institutions in which we live. It's a fact of life in the private sector institutions as well. So, you know, the proof here will be in the behavior and what happens with these statutes in the months ahead. Okay, I've got, come on up. Dave can go fourth. Yeah.
I'm a bit taller and I don't want to lean down, so I'm going to try.
You can probably yeah, there you go. Yeah.
I don't do many shows. I'm Paul Kelleher in medical history and bioethics. You've mentioned a few times how, maybe heartened isn't the right word, but how glad you were to see that the regents unanimously took existing statutory language and put it into their conditional policy. That's the policy that if current statutory language is taken out in the budget, then this will be the new policy. In that resolution where they did that in the Friday of the June 5th, the last sentence reads, "This new Regent policy document will sunset on the date that the board adopts a tenure policy as a result of the work of the Tenure Policy Task Force, which shall be no later than June 15th, 2016. So what the regents did was that they unanimously took existing language and went with it for a year, just officially. Okay. So you haven't mentioned that fact much, and I'm not, this isn't a criticism of your public remarks, but I did want to take this opportunity to ask you to tell us a little bit about what you know about this task force, because we're not hearing a lot about it. Who's on it? Maybe you can't tell us what we can expect from it because your last answer was we have to wait and see. But after this motion was passed, Regent Drew Peterson said on the record during the proceedings that he believed that the board was committed to completing action on a modernized tenure policy. So along with the other questions I've asked, I don't know if you have any sense of what that might mean. But if you did have some sense, it would be nice to hear about that.
No, that's a very fair and serious question. So the regents actually appointed this committee about a month ago. And part of the response I think you're seeing is the idea where there's this committee in place that's going to look at these issues. We don't want to get out in front of it, right? And the committee is going to be chaired by John Bailing, who's the new vice chair of the regents, lawyer from Eau Claire. On the committee is a mix of faculty, staff, and students and administrators from across the system. Our provost is on it, and I think it's Dorothy who's on. Which one is Beth on and which one is Dorothy on? Dorothy Farrar-Edwards, who is on the UC, is one of the faculty representatives. So we have 2 representatives on this committee. When it was originally, we have 3. Who's the third? Oh, Pat McManus. Thank you. Yes. There's 2 committees here, and I get confused as to who's on which. So we got actually 3 representatives on the committee, which some people I'm sure are complaining about because it's way too many. I think they're like 14, 15 members. It's something around that size. The original intent of that committee was to look at tenure review, and it was to deal with sort of this constant flow of criticism about what are you guys doing with tenure over there, and to keep legislative action from occurring by saying, look, we're going to be serious about post-tenure review. There's some schools and colleges at this university who do it quite seriously. There are others, quite honestly, who don't. And it's a reasonable request to look at post-tenure review. How are we doing that in different schools in the system? And how should we be doing it better? So that's what the committee was set up to look at. When this language got dropped and the Board of Regents were responding pretty quickly, I think they felt, well, we'll just turn that over to this committee. Now, I do not know that that's going to happen. I think both Ray Cross and Regina Milner understand they've got to move faster than whatever that was, June of 2016 on this issue. They just can't let this pen that long. And I think a later amendment said that committee would have to report in by April of 2016. Even that is just too long to wait. And I don't think they have quite settled the process by which they're going to look at these set of issues and writing administrative language for other schools in the system, as opposed to what this committee is going to do around, and if this committee is going to end up just doing post-tenure, I just think that's not settled. When they did that resolution, which they say was within days of first hearing about it, I think they didn't want to step on that committee in their first direction, was just give it over to them. Upon reflection and given all the responses, I think most people agree this might have to move on a different time frame, whether it gets, and it's going to require advice, not just from a committee of 14 people. It's going to require input from all of the campuses, and they're going to have to put a broader consultation process together. But I can't get too far out in front of that because I think it isn't settled yet. And again, we'll have to see where it goes. I understand the questions. I understand there are unsettled issues here, and no one is more interested than I in making sure they get settled the right way. But right now, there are still some questions and issues that are just going to have to be worked on in the next several months. Dave.
So this is on messaging and the media and your frustration with media claims that tenure's been abolished. I think I understand your frustration because it oversimplifies a complex issue. But I think also I speak for myself, and I think I speak for a number of other faculty who say that it's also frustrating to hear the message that tenure has simply been moved from state statute into regental policy, especially since the only thing that really has been moved is the language on dismissal for cause and in relation to Section 12. But we also have problems with Sections 35, 38, and of course, the odious Section 39. And President Ray Cross went as far as to say at the Education Committee on June 4th, if a tenured member of the faculty can be arbitrarily dismissed, then that's not tenure. And I say that I am frustrated by the messaging coming out because I have been approached by a number of people who are motivated and aware of the issue who have said, oh, I thought that this has already been taken care of. The AAUP's floor resolution, which was passed this weekend at their 101st annual meeting, said provision after provision is at odds with AAUP's recommended institutional regulations on academic freedom and tenure. So isn't it really kind of a half-truth to say that tenure has been shifted from state policy into regental policy when it's really not tenure at all, but what Milwaukee Journal Sentinel said, tenure light?
So I've tried to be careful in my language, and there may be times when I'm not as careful as I should be. The definition and authorization of tenure at UW system schools has shifted, okay, let me say that clearly, from statute into regental policy. And tenure is allowed to all of us. The question of what that means and under what circumstances you may be able to dismiss faculty is the issue that most people are concerned about and about which we are discussing the writing of administrative language. I cannot look at you, and I will say that there was some FAQs that came out that I did not see before they were posted, and one of the sentences in that FAQ say, tenure will be no different afterwards than it is now. That is not an accurate statement. And I heard from someone that people are really upset with your FAQs, and I went and looked at it and I said, well, of course, right? That's not the right statement. There are some change, tenure is going to be defined by a different entity. The protections around it will be defined with different language than before. In the past, we could do dismissal only for just cause or a financial emergency declared across the entire university. It's not very surprising that that authority never got taken up. And no matter how this language gets written, we are going to be able to at least consider the possibility of looking at tenure questions in the case of program closures. Now, that is consistent with AAUP language, which lets you look at program closures for financial or educational related purposes, right? So that's what we have to think about, and we have to write language that is consistent along those lines.
It's consistent with
Yeah.
AAUP policy if the primary responsibility is vested
Yes.
in the faculty or
Yes.
committee thereof.
I
So
understand
that has
that.
to be changed as well, not just
Yeah.
the words has to be
Yeah.
primary responsibility.
I understand that, yeah.
Unlike some of my faculty colleagues, I'm actually relatively comfortable with the idea that people could be laid off essentially for reasons of program closure. But to me, the language about program modification or redirection is so insanely vague as to mean almost anything. If we take one of the classes in my program that is now required and make it an elective, can we then fire the tenured faculty member who teaches that class? If we take a class from another department that is now required and stop requiring it, can that department be forced to fire the tenured faculty member who taught that elective that we're no longer requiring? I just would like to hear your thoughts on that.
So, this is why I would really love to see this language changed and why it's just the wrong language for faculty tenure. All of that said, I'm going back to what I said before. Nothing requires that you fire people when you shift courses around. It simply says to the Board of Regents that they have the authority to essentially define the rules around which faculty layoffs will be considered. And here are some of the cases they could look at. Now, if it just said program elimination and dropped the last three, I don't think we'd be having this discussion at the same degree of intensity. And that's the type of change we're trying to get in the language. And when we ask for a veto resolution, as you all know, the governor has incredibly strong veto powers. He can cross out words, asking him to cross out those last three words. But I am back at the point that the Board of Regents can adopt into policy, as we can in our faculty rules and procedures, the circumstances under which we would take up this authority. And I will accept nothing less than a statement that says we take this up in the case of curtailment, of program elimination due to financial emergency or for good educational reasons. And even then, like all of these statutes say, all other considerations will be made before you look at a faculty layoff who is a tenured faculty member. You know, I've been at universities that closed programs where there clearly the faculty were in threat in some ways. And in my experience, and these were all first-rate universities, either there were faculty who retired or faculty moved to other departments, right? And some of those moves weren't very happy, and some of those moves were great. But, you know, it goes back to the issue that I think most people believe that tenure is held at the university, not within a department. So, you know, you need to deal with this in the right way.
I guess the one other
Yeah.
comment I would make is
Yeah.
that with faculty governance, at least as it exists now, it is up to the receiving department whether to receive the tenured faculty member whose program has been eliminated. So
I would think that this would be one of the changes that people would want to look at when they're looking at changes in rules to faculty procedures. You know, is that if indeed you're closing a department and you want to consider other options, you ought to have some ability to suggest to, I don't know, the sociology department that this person, you know, geography, I'm not threatening it here at all, let me say, but other places have closed their geography department, and a good number of those people moved into other social sciences, right? You know, it's actually been to our benefit because we now have an absolutely great geography department and, you know, aren't in competition with as many people. But, you know, it's exactly those sorts of procedures that you need to be looking at. Yeah. Yeah.
My name is Gary Weismer. I'm the chair of Communication Sciences and Disorders, and the microphones seem unused over here. Also, it's on the left side of the room where I'm comfortable.
More people on the right here. I don't know.
Yeah, I know. I'm a little confused about the task force, the tenure task force. It sounds like it's at a system level
Yes.
versus a committee that is
Thank you.
operating at the UW-Madison level.
Yeah.
Could you say something about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have been given explicit permission from both Ray Cross and from Regina Milner, the chair of the Board of Regents, that we in Madison can move forward with drafting policy language that is appropriate for us here in Madison. And on that basis, the UC is looking at people to appoint to this committee. We will write this language, we'll put it through our faculty senate, and we will bring it to the Board of Regents for approval at Madison. There's a number of reasons to do that. One is we're just different in kind from the other schools, but the other, which clearly fits with this, is that we do, starting July 1st, have our separate HR system from the rest of the system, and that also gives us a little bit more authority to say we will write our own procedures around this, okay? So, you know, the system has this task force that's going to, and again, exactly how that's going to work, I think, is under a heavy debate and discussion right now, and, you know, how they're going to move forward. We have a clear procedure to follow, and my concern is that we not write this, put it through the Faculty Senate, come up with a set of rules and recommendations, and then the Board of Regents says, well, we wrote another policy for everyone else, we're just going to cover you, forget your, you know, that would be a disaster. And I have said that quite clearly. I have strong commitments from the people I think are most likely to be able to enforce that we will have the authority to move forward with our own statutory, our own policy-related language. But again, you know, you've got to see this proceed. Okay. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for this opportunity to get updates and also ask questions. My name is Adina Rissman. I'm in the Forest and Wildlife Ecology Department. And although I appreciate the approach to protect us here at UW-Madison, I'm also quite concerned about other campuses around the state that maybe don't have the clout or privilege that we have here. And I have a colleague who described an instance at another campus of not having a lot of support from the deans and really feeling both pressure within local communities as well as within the campus. And so I guess I'm wondering, first, encouraging you to not just focus on Madison, but also to take the broader system into account. And from a forestry perspective, for instance, most of our important forest resources are elsewhere in the state and not here in Dane County. although we do have nice forests here in Dane County too, but the majority of our forest resources is obviously in the north. And it's important to have places like Stevens Point and other locations who have strong faculty who also have those protections. So I guess I'm also curious about what kinds of strategies your office can take to help encourage that system-wide.
So I have every expectation that a number of our faculty and a number of faculty on other campuses will be working together on this. My responsibility has to be UW-Madison. You know, I'm not going to tell the Oshkosh Chancellor what to do, and he would not welcome that any more than I would welcome him standing up and telling me what to do under these circumstances. All of that said, you know, there's going to be very close collaboration between what's happening across all of these campuses. One reason I want us to get out front is because I actually think we're probably going to have a pretty good faculty committee who's going to write a pretty good draft of possible policies. And if we get that done before the system sort of gets its act together and gets moving, it's highly likely that ours is going to be a model for them. And, you know, that would be good, in my opinion. But at the end of the day, I can't affect, and it's not my job to affect what the Board of Regents is going to do for the four-year comprehensives, other than modeling what we think here in Madison is the right policy for a top-rated university. And, you know, I hope they're all going to listen. Go ahead.
I'd like to return to the
Yes.
lobbying question
Yes.
and the lobbying of particular senators and the alumni. First, I assume, as you outlined the intense and deep conversations with people, that these are ongoing. That
Yes,
this
absolutely.
This is recent. This
Yeah.
isn't,
I literally hung up the phone on one conversation right before coming here, so, yeah.
Okay. There are senators, other than Luther Olson, who are not on JFC, who can possibly be moved. You mentioned Cowles. Petrowski and Gudex, I'm informed by a senator, are potential. And the question is whether these people outside the JFC could be pleaded with to hold out on the omnibus bill, or the budget bill, if this language is not removed. I would just say one more. I have more, but I just had an idea. Can you make the acceptance of that $50 million contingent on the removal of the offending language? Can you say to the donors, hey, we'd love your money, but help us here?
That would probably get us nowhere other than losing $50 million, I hate to say. But, you know,
I knew
yeah.
that.
Yeah, no,
I knew
know.
that.
Yeah, it was a hypothetical question. So we're in a public forum with press, and I'm not going to comment on strategies with individual legislators. If you want to talk with Charlie Hazelet afterwards, I'd encourage you to do so. Realize that it's only the Joint Finance Committee that's going to probably affect the language in the omnibus budget resolution as it finally emerges. And therefore, if you're then going to change the language on the floor, you have to have a majority vote, not just, you've got to have a majority vote of both the Senate and the Assembly to make those changes. And I will tell you that I think that's relatively unlikely. I don't know, Charlie, do you want to say anything else in addition on this issue? Okay, yeah, good. Anyone else? This was not last week's Faculty Senate where I had folks lined up at the microphone 4 and 5 deep.
So I'll
Yeah.
use this microphone on the left again, just to make it more interesting. So I'm wondering what
So
happens...
identify yourself so we all know who you are.
Yes,
Thanks.
Jelena Sudorovich.
Yeah.
What happens when the GPR funding erodes even further? And it probably will in the next biennium. So I'm wondering, does program discontinuous, curtailment, modification, or redirection then become a real and significant threat to the university? And does the authority from the Section 39 of the Omnibus Motion then become not only easily justified but necessary when the university is faced with the further deeper reduction? And maybe a follow-up question or prequel section of question to that. Can you tell us what happened to the block grant the dedicated funding stream that they were announcing as a different model of
Yeah.
financing.
That didn't happen, did not come out of the budget committee, right? You know, Ray Cross was working very hard on that, and he did not persuade enough people to get that through in the budget.
All right. So,
Yeah,
so my
yeah.
question is, what happens when we're hit with another 200 million
Yeah.
reduction?
Yeah. So, you know, I think, you know, I'm going to make two answers to that, and because you've got a very specific question, I'm going to first answer it at a higher level. We've been through how many budget bienniums? I think it's 5 of the last 6 of budget cuts, right? And so have most all of our other public brothers and sisters out there in terms of other institutions. And, you know, the state budget, it might go up a little bit here or there one year or another, but by and large, we're never going back to the world we were in. And the likelihood is state dollars for us and for virtually all other public institutions is going to continue to decline at least somewhat, right? And is my high-level answer, which is, you know, I just want to say, since I've got a group of main faculty here in the room, is we need strategies around this as to how we are going to expand some of our other revenue sources. And one of the things that I hope to talk about, I hope to engage a whole variety of groups on campus about, is talking about those strategies. One of them is clearly the campaign that we're in the midst of, right, with our donors, and expanding our donor dollars on key areas that we need for supporting this university. You know, that's one of the things what the faculty chairs were about. It's what the scholarships are about, key central areas. That's one area of push. A second area is making ourselves, giving ourselves market level rates in areas where we do have control over our prices. And I realize there's some concern about the increase in out-of-state tuition, and you know we are plowing some amount of that money back into financial aid, so we don't lose access to this university among lower-income out-of-state students. But there are a lot of out-of-state students who their choice is us versus someplace where they'd spend $15,000 to $20,000 more a year, and they choose the other institution. And you know, we have margins to move there. So that's another strategy, right? A third strategy is thinking how we generate more tuition revenue. And I'm hoping we're going to have some conversations about summer session and using summer session more effectively. And you know, Madison is a great place to be in the summer. And a number of schools have really worked to trying to increase their curricular offerings and not just get some students who are regularly here in the winter and spring to work in the summer, but to get more people to come in to campus. And that's all along, you know, sort of a way up here answer to your question, but we've got to be strategizing on how we create stable financial sources of income for this university, even if state dollars continue to fall, or I would say, you know, so your specific question, what does this mean for programs? And of course the answer is, you know, budget cuts are hard and they lead to big problems. That is exactly why we need very clear language about when budget cuts, if ever, are going to lead us to look at faculty layoffs, right? If you're actually closing a full department or closing a school and college, God forbid, you know, that is exactly the circumstance. And again, I've sort of seen this happen at other universities where faculty get really nervous and you try to do everything you can to, you know, find other places for them. Some people leave, some people retire, some people will take jobs in other units. I've never seen a tier 1 university in that situation actually abrogate tenure. And, you know, I've seen some tier 2 and 3 universities do that under those circumstances. But we don't aspire to be a tier 2 or 3 university. And we should not have policies that would look like we were. Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else? Otherwise, I'm going to call one last time. Yeah. Okay, go for it.
The last area I wanted to ask about is alumni, mobilizing alumni. When you led the charge over the budget cuts, asking alumni to phone in, you were accused of playing Washington politics, and this did not go well. I assume that might be part of the reason you haven't led the charge for the alumni to do the same. My question, though, is are behind the scenes, are possibly sympathetic, but also prominent, influential alumni being asked to pressure members of the legislature?
So I have to respond to your first comment, which is that we did not back off of reaching out to alumni despite that criticism. And in fact, in the last few weeks prior to these budget proposals coming out, we made a major, did major outreach to our, not Dane County, because we didn't need to do this, to our alumni in all other parts of the state. We got, I think it's something like 11,000 alumni responding with postcards in those last few weeks. That is an unheard of response to that type of an appeal, which is a statement of both the sort of outreach we were trying to do and the response of the alumni.
And
Now,
sending
yeah.
that to the legislature?
Yes, that was all around the budget, right? Now, we just did that literally, a month ago, or in some cases less than a month ago. And you can only go to your alumni so many times. And this is a relatively complicated issue, right? Unlike a budget cut. That's why we are really focusing on our Alumni for Wisconsin group, which is the group that's really indicated their interest and willingness to support us on legislative action rather than trying to target all alumni across the state. Because I think, we've got a short period of time. We've got to focus on the people we think are going to respond and have a little bit of the sophistication necessary. So that's why and again, this isn't I should be talking about us because we don't run the alumni group, but that is where they are focusing, as well as then providing larger information through various mechanisms, which certainly invites people who want to come back and ask more questions to do so, if that's a fair answer. Yeah. All questions have been answered. Look, I really appreciate you all coming today. And like I say, I know that many of you have been playing an important role in your departments, in your schools and colleges, of talking to other people. And I cannot emphasize how important it is that we all keep talking to each other and working this through. I'm delighted with the university committee group that is out there. They may be less delighted with having this problem dumped in their face, but we've got a strong university committee to move forward with sort of the first step of this process, which is appointing a group to write the right procedures. And I expect all of you to pay very close attention and ask all of the hard questions and keep pushing at me, because I, like you, care a great deal about making sure we get through this and get to the right place and keep this university what it has been. So thank you all for coming.